Good afternoon, everyone, and happy Thanksgiving. This is Jason Dean here at Film Fanatic, doing my first holiday special, or if you want to call it that. So, yeah, it's about 12:20, and for me, in a few hours, the feast will commence. I usually go over to my folks about 3 or 4 o'clock, and we pig out for numerous hours and watch movies and drink some good beer and have a good time. So looking forward to that. Most folks, from what I gather, seem to eat dinner on the earlier side, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. We tend to eat a little bit in the afternoon. So hope everyone's doing good. Really appreciate everybody's feedback, making this little this strange little project of mine, slowly grow. I really love doing this. So today I want to do a video that's focusing on my favorite movie of all time, and that is The Godfather. It came out in 1972, and it was directed by Francis Ford Coppola, with an amazing cast: Robert Duvall, Al Pacino, James Caan, Marlon Brando. It's one of those questions that sometimes people ask, like what's your favorite? And it's a lot of the times it can be considered a cliched question or a cheesy question. Do you have your favorite band or your favorite movie or your favorite book, or what's your top 20? Do you have a top 20 list? Or the one I like the most is like your desert island, you know, scenario. If you're trapped on a desert island, what albums would you bring with you, or what movies would you bring with you, or what books would you bring with you, or would you like to have if that was the case? With the way my mode of operation is and how I think of things, I do kind of play in that field a lot. I think of things in that nature quite a bit. Some movies. One of the things I love about watching some of the YouTube guys and girls that I follow a lot on YouTube, as they do lots of specials around their top 20 lists or top 10 lists, top 10, say top 10 slasher films of all time. I I love hearing what people dig, because I feel when you get that kind of insight, you really see where their tastes are, and you see if they tend to be more in a particular area, or if they're pretty expansive in their tastes, or even if they have these eclectic tastes. And that's, to me, I always find really interesting and fascinating. I tend to think I have, and people have said, I tend to think that I have like eclectic tastes, and people have commented that I do have a pretty wide range of tastes, and I don't know, I look at that as a compliment. I don't see why you can't like something like a movie like, say, or like a big budget Hollywood movie like Con Air with Nicolas Cage, and why you can't love a movie like that, and also a movie like, say, Tourist Trap, one of my all-time favorite movies. It's the full spectrum. It's like, at the end of the day, genres and labels, we need those things. That's how we function, being able to label things, and then subgenres. But at the end of the day, for me, it's about, if that movie or art kind of resonates with me and makes me excited. And if there's a level of escapism to it, that's all that matters to me. And for me, I always think of my top movies and my top albums of all time. I just always think in terms of that a lot of the times. Certain movies, and these are not these this is this little list that I'm going to talk about isn't really in any particular order. It's a pretty informal list. It's kind of more in the moment of things that I naturally kind of gravitate towards. But certain films I would name, if somebody was to ask me my top 20 or my top 10 list, Certain films that I would just immediately probably spew out would be Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. Probably my favorite film of his overall, and he's probably also, well, he's definitely my favorite director of all time. That would definitely be on the list. Another one of his amazing films, 2001: Space Odyssey, incredible movie. Ridley Scott's Blade Runner, probably my favorite, definitely my favorite science fiction movie of all time, and in general one of my favorite films of all time. Another Ridley Scott film, Alien, a masterpiece. I've seen that movie probably 1,000 times. Another one that always pops in to my head when I think about these things is a film called All the President's Men with Robert Redford and Dustin Hoffman. Amazing film. I think one of the best thrillers, really. I look at that film as a thriller, and that film's all about the Richard Nixon scandal. That's a movie I can just throw in any given day or any given time. Another movie which I mentioned, Tourist Trap. For me, my favorite horror exploitation movie of all time. And I love that movie so much that even outside of that label or say that genre, it's just in general my one of my all-time favorite movies. That's definitely on there. Another movie which I just did a review for is a movie called Private Parts. That movie I just love so much. It's one of the most it's got to be one of the strangest movies I've ever seen, and that's kind of considered, more or less first and foremost an exploitation horror movie. Such an incredibly bizarre movie, and it's also like a black comedy. Easily one of my favorite films. I just did a review in a show for that film. That that's definitely in or within that list. Another film I could think of would be The Howling. Probably my favorite werewolf movie of all time. Just amazing. Some of the best makeup effects, and I think to a degree one of the most like kind of original stories dealing with the concept of the werewolf. Love that movie so much. So many great films, and going going a little bit outside of that for comedies. I haven't really done any comedies for this channel, and eventually I do comedies. I don't tend to watch a whole lot of comedies, especially newer ones, but I do love comedy. Comedy's one of my favorite. Well, just in a person on a personal note or in a personal level, that's one of the things I find most attractive about people if they have a good sense of humor. So, Napoleon Dynamite, easily one of my favorite comedies of all time. Just absolutely love that movie. It's such a phenomenal movie. Another one, it's more of a skit comedy show, Mr. Show with Bob and David. Bob Odenkirk, easily like probably my favorite comedy or skits comedy show. I'll eventually probably do a show on that. I did do a Facebook post review of that quite a while, quite a ways back. But generally, so many great movies. And as far as music goes, I would say like Herbie Hancock's Thrust, probably my favorite album that he's ever done, with the legendary Paul Jackson and Mike Clark, probably my favorite rhythm section of all time. Anything, really anything and everything by my favorite band of all time, Alltecker. These you know British duo from England that's been around for close to 20 to 25 years. My favorite band of all time. Pretty much anything from them I can dig and listen to on any given day. I'm a huge Aphex Twin, also signed to the same label of of where Autechre is part of. They're both British electronic artists. They're both on Warp Records. As far as Aphex Twin, Drux would be my favorite album of his, and also his ambient works. Uh, Miles Davis Quintet, Nefertiti, probably my favorite jazz album. So a lot of times I kind of think in terms of that, and then like a lot of new things, I try to, I typically gravitate towards movies and music that is, kind of from like that tends to be older, but like things from like the 70s, 60s, and 80s. That tends to be where my tastes are as far as film and also music. I always tend to go back to those decades and those periods. I do love a lot of new things, and I try to see a lot of new things. One movie as far as newer horror movies or really current horror movies is Ty West X. I think that is a tremendous movie. Probably overall the best newer horror film I've seen in quite some time. I just got the prequel yesterday. I just rented it, so I'm really excited, and it's called Pearl. So I'm super excited to see that. So, but at the end of the day, my all-time favorite movie is The Godfather. This movie, and to me, it's like it's synonymous. And it's funny. It might sound strange, but I always, whenever I see this movie or watch it, it always makes me think. Well, it makes me think of family, but it always makes me think of Thanksgiving. When I was a kid, we used to watch this all the time on TV. It was always on cable. They would always, and they still do. I'm sure it will be on today when I go over my folks' place in at some capacity. But as a kid, it was always on either the day before Thanksgiving. It was always on Thanksgiving Day that they would show the movie, the day before and the day of, and it would be in constant rotation. And then the following day, which is Black Friday, when people go a little crazy. So that was always part of my childhood growing up, and I think there is a connection too because most of my background or my heritage is Italian, and I grew up in a predominantly Italian household. My mother's maiden name is Masiello, and my grandfather, her mother, and his parents, they came from Italy, and supposedly we have a lot of family that still lives in Italy, and I've never been to Italy, so that would be pretty wild. It is a place on my destination list anyway to go to someday. I've always wanted to go there. And I've heard over the years that we supposedly have relatives that still live there. That so that would be pretty cool. But we always grew up. I always grew up in a big, where we would have these big gatherings on the holidays, and my grandmother would always cook all of this pasta and meatballs and sausage, and it was always lots of bread, and it was always that kind of atmosphere, like a typical Italian American family. So there was always like commonality, with seeing the Corleone family on the screen as far as like how Italian Americans live, and there's always this real deep sense of family and a sense of loyalty. So, but the last 10 years, my folks and I are the only ones who really get together on the holidays. The rest of my family still lives in New York, so our holidays have been, for, at least for a very long time, have been always like pretty mellow and low key, which has been great. But as a kid, they were always like 35, 40 people, 45 people sometimes, like huge gatherings. So it was always this kind of thing, and I always felt that connection with this film because this movie is really, even though it's very dark and it's very it's a very it's one of the greatest I feel melodramas ever written, but it's very dark, but it really essentially it's about the family and the family and the mechanics of a family and how a family dynamic works. So I've always had that connection with it, and so it's always been a thing that it's one of those movies too. Wherever I am, And if it happens to be on television or wherever, and it can be, and it's a fairly long movie. It's close to 3 hours. It can, it could be maybe say 20 minutes in, or maybe the last 20 minutes, or the first 20 minutes, or wherever it is. It's one of those movies that if I come into a room and say if The Godfather's playing, I'll stop whatever I'm doing, and I'll sit down and watch it and give it my full attention because I can't. There's something about it, I can't not watch it. It just automatically draws me in. I got to see The Godfather on the big screen, and it was good, but I was also disappointed because it, what had happened was, well, I should say, the last few years there's been, and it's been a thing, but like at least locally, there's been a few handful of or a handful of movie theaters that have basically, had these showings of where they show these classic films. Films, older films, and there's been two times where I got to see two films that I really love that are some of my favorite films on the big screen that I had already seen, but to see them on the big screen was truly two of the best like film going experiences I ever had. I got to see Apocalypse Now, the Redux, the extended director's cut. I got to see that on the big screen once, and the thing that was so amazing about this, I on one side, on one side of the discussion, like I had already seen that movie a bazillion times before, but I never had never seen the director's cut. But when I saw it in the theater, it was the actual film. It was the actual original film and the negative for the original film, and so it was literally like seeing it for the first time. The with the incredible sound and the and just the gorgeous cinematography. To see it on actual film in a movie theater was a truly magical experience. And I did see also Halloween, John Carpenter's 1978 classic. I saw that on the big screen around Halloween a few years ago. And it was that same experience. I had seen that movie, hundreds of times before. And I got to see it in a beautiful theater, and it was the original film print. It was the original stock footage, basically. And it was literally like seeing it for the first time, and it was truly a magical experience. And since then, I've looked around for when they do things like that, when certain theaters do that. And a lot of the times, what I find, and I've gone to see a lot of movies, but a lot of the times, it's basically these theaters will like acquire like a DVD copy of the film, or even like a second grade or second level Blu-ray copy of the film, and they basically will project that, and show that for the film. And the pixelation's always off. The sound isn't really great, and it's very disorienting, and it's not, that format. Watching a Blu-ray or even especially a DVD, those that's not the real way, and it's not the correct way to watch a film because it's not formatted correctly. So everything is off. But if you are able to get, like, say, a high quality DVD, like a lot of the Blu-rays I've been buying, particularly around a lot of these grindhouse movies, they they're all, what I've seen is they're all mastered. These companies put so much work into the process, but a lot of these Blu-rays are mastered directly from the original like film and negative, like directly. So it's a direct link towards that. So the quality is amazing. It's really, at the end of the day, it's even better than if you were to see it, say, in the theater. It's still got that grittiness to it, but the clarity is just so amazing. And then also the sound is usually remastered, so it's just amazing. And I feel like, well, at least in most of my experiences when theaters do these things, it's usually, with a DVD copy, or a second rate or second grade Blu-ray. It's not quite that quality, and it's definitely not the original film, which is a harder process, and is actually harder to be able to get a hold of. And I saw The Godfather in the theater, and it was basically a Blu-ray that they had used. And I remember before I went to see the show, this was over the summer. Before I went to the show, I actually uh, messaged or got in contact with the theater owners, just inquiring to see how are they going to be showing this film, what like kind of format were they were going to be using, and they responded and they basically said, well, what we do, and they had started a series during this time where they were showing lots of like the classics, and they responded and said, well, basically it's going to be like a high end Blu-ray version, just shy of like say a 4K with like just shy of like a 4K resolution. So I was like, cool, and I went to go see it, and it was okay. Like some of it was really great, but then there were times for certain scenes where the pixelation was totally off and the sound was just not as strong as it could be. And it was and at the end of the day, it was basically that same kind of scenario where it was a little bit of a better quality Blu-ray version of the film, but again, it's not. Blu-rays are not meant to be. They're not made to for that kind of format. It doesn't work. They're designed for home systems and Blu-ray players and surround sound systems. They're not really used in a like a theater for like a theater experience. They're just not designed that way. So the everything is going to be off. The compression is off. It's kind of like when you watch films. I feel like when you're streaming films, it's gotten better, I think, with the technology, but typically it's everything is really compressed because of how the technology is that they need to use to be able to stream these movies. So everything is kind of really condensed. So it's that same kind of thing. It's not really designed for that. But again, I saw The Godfather, and halfway in I realized it wasn't really great quality. But then again, it's one of those things where I was still 100% into it. I didn't leave. I watched the entire thing, and I still enjoyed it. The funny thing was that the people who were hosting this showing, they did a little presentation before. It was in this really awesome theater, and there was a stage, and they gave a little presentation and a little talk about The Godfather, which I thought was really cool and actually pretty interesting. And at the end of it, they had asked, before they started the movie, they started to ask people, how many people, got a chance have seen this movie. And there wasn't a whole lot of people there. There was probably about 25, 30 people there. And the age groups were pretty mixed. There was younger people, which was cool to see. There were quite a few like high school kids. There were people my age, and then there were people older than I was by quite a bit. So it was the full spectrum, more or less. But just about everybody in the theater, which I was so amazed, had never seen The Godfather. And I was just like, wow, like this was the first time they were ever going to see it. And I just find that mind boggling to me, you know, especially, well, on one level, if you're a person who is a real deep, a person who has a real deep love for film and they collect film and they buy them, and like say someone like me, and then even somebody who, really loves film, but they go see lots of films, and then you have people who occasionally will see a film. I probably fit more in the later category, but I always make the comparison to, when I run across people, especially if people say that they're big film fans. I always make the comparison to I always make this music comparison. Say like, say a person goes around and they say, oh, my favorite style of music is rock and roll. I love music from the '60s, '70s, '80s, '90s, or music current, that's current. But my whole thing is I love rock and roll music. That's my favorite style. And then say if you're having a conversation with that person, and you say, well, okay, well, what's your favorite Led Zeppelin album, or what do you think of Led Zeppelin? Do you like, the later or the earlier stuff, or blah blah blah? And then their response is, well, who is Led Zeppelin? I don't know who that is. To me, it's like that. It like, they they were such a part of the whole architecture of what rock and roll is. It's like essential to at least know who they are. And I feel like that's what The Godfather is for filmmaking and just in general for film for and film history. It's such a it has it, it has such a unique place in history, and it's part of the architecture of filmmaking itself. So it's always, when if that comes up in conversation, I'm just like, I kind of can't believe it. And you know, the history of The Godfathers is pretty phenomenal. It's, Francis Ford Coppola. Like, this film was released by Paramount Pictures, one of the biggest companies, especially during that time, and even now. And when Francis Ford Coppola was picked to do this film, he immediately was under so much pressure. They When he started filming, they basically, a lot of the executives were wanting to see a lot of the footage right away, and and the dailies, and right from the get go they were hounding him for reasons, all kinds of reasons of where they felt there wasn't going to be enough violence in the movie. They thought the film was going to be too long, was too slow. They needed to put more action in the film, and they needed to cut it. It was going to be too long, and then also when Francis Ford Coppola was trying to get Al Pacino at the time, who plays Michael Corleone, was an unknown actor. Because he was unknown, Paramount was dead set against him. So he had to fight. He was in this war basically to get Al Pacino cast in this film. And the other thing, because of all of these hurdles and all of the adversity that Coppola was dealing with, the studio Paramount Pictures was basically ready to basically fire Francis Ford Coppola at any given second. And he said in a lot of these interviews, because this collection, unfortunately, I don't have this on Blu-ray. I don't know why. I've looked around for a really good, great quality package, and I just haven't really found it. It's really weird. But so this is a DVD collection, which I really love. It's got 3 discs of, like, basically 5 to 6 hours of how this movie was made, and it's just phenomenal. And I really love this package. This came out quite a few years ago, probably about 15 years ago. And eventually I'll buy, like, Blu-ray editions of the movie, but I really love this package. But Francis Ford Coppola talks extensively in the interviews and with the special features of how he, every time he was on set shooting one of these scenes or shooting the film, he felt like he was under the gun, that he could be fired at any given moment. And Paramount even took the steps of where they had hired somebody else to be the director to take Coppola's place. And they even had kind of the audacity to have this person that they hired to be basically on set watching Coppola, knowing that he could be fired at any given moment. And he had all of this unbelievable weight on his back, and he had so much pressure throughout the entire process of this movie. And then when it was finally made, it was a phenomenon. It was a huge commercial hit. Paramount then approached him about doing these other films, and eventually there were 2 other films that came out. And it kind of goes back to sometimes that notion of where, great works of art kind of come out of places of where there's, like, a lot of darkness or a lot of instability. Another film that Coppola was involved with, where he faced incredible odds and just total adversity, was Apocalypse Now. And sometimes I think, he's a true artist, and he created these masterpieces, and I feel like, that really maybe at the end of the day helped this process, like, for him to make something that is such a work of art. It's always an interesting kind of discussion, but again, this is one of those movies I can watch any given day at any given point, if it's on in the background or whatnot. So if you're even if you're a casual fan, I don't think you have to be a film fanatic per se, but if you're a casual fan, and especially if you're, if you consider yourself a legitimate fan of film, this movie is essential. It's one of like I feel it's one of the holy books or one of the holy Bibles in the world of filmmaking. It's essential. So this is Jason Dean. Thanks again for all the support. If you get a chance, please like and subscribe to my page. And happy Thanksgiving. And definitely check out this movie. It's the ultimate film for the holidays and especially Thanksgiving. Thank you. Have a great day.